Russia's full-scale invasion into Ukraine 3.5 years ago might have been prevented if NATO allies had shown more resolve in arming Ukraine post-2014. Now that's quite a statement, and that statement is coming from no other than the man who coordinated NATO allies' response at the time, Jens Stoltenberg. Welcome to DW.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you're currently Norway's finance minister. A lot of people know you from your tenure as NATO's Secretary General for 10 years. You held that position until last year. You're now also a published author where you write about that time that was not void of crises. But was that your biggest regret, that NATO allies didn't react to the invasion of Crimea more resolutely in 2014?
Yes, because that's the case where I most clearly see that if we had acted differently, we may have achieved a much better outcome. Of course, we never have certainty. We never know what would have happened if we had done something else. But I think it's quite obvious that if we had provided more military support to Ukraine in the period between Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea and the full-scale invasion of Ukraine 8 years later in 22, at least the Ukrainians would have been more able to protect themselves, to defend themselves, and then Russia would have controlled much less territory of Ukraine today. But perhaps even Russia and Putin would have made another calculus and realized that to invade Ukraine had a too high price, was too difficult, and then refrained from the full-scale invasion. And I think you have to remember that in that period, 2014 to 2022, many NATO allies were heavily against providing Ukraine with basic military support, with training, with equipment. And in NATO were big discussions about any lethal aid to Ukraine. So in that period, Ukraine received very little support, and therefore they were not armed, not equipped, not trained in the way they could have been when the full-scale invasion happened in 22.
One of those countries that you just referred to was, of course, Germany. How frustrated were you with consecutive German governments at the time?
Well, I disagreed. We had, for instance, when you are Secretary General of NATO, you have a lot of power, but you also sometimes don't decide anything, because at the end of the day, it is the nations that decide. They own the organization, and even if you are a Secretary General, you lead the organization, you lead the meetings, and I can push and argue, but at the end of the day, if I don't convince the allies, there will be no decision. And we had, for instance, a discussion in NATO, I think it was as late as 2020, whether NATO could help to provide sniper rifles. Even that was blocked. Not only by Germany, by the majority of allies. And this was because they were afraid of provoking Russia. So we didn't support Ukraine, or at least provided very limited military support. Russia invaded, and then we stepped up. But of course, if we had only given a fraction of the same military aid before invasion than we have given after, we may have been able to prevent the whole war.
I have to stay with Germany for just a little longer, though, because not only did they not send arms to Ukraine post-2014, they also were against Ukrainian NATO membership, and there's very high dependency on Russian energy sources. So again, how frustrated were you with them?
Again, my answer is that I disagreed on some of these issues, but then I also have to be honest about myself. I also gradually changed my mind on some of these issues. Back in 2008, I was a Prime Minister of Norway, and we had the first decision in Bucharest about NATO membership for Ukraine. Norway agreed with Germany. I, as Prime Minister, we thought it was too early and too risky to invite Ukraine to become a member. And it's possible to understand the concerns that we should not provoke Russia, but I think at some stage we should all have understood that Russia has decided that they want to control Ukraine. And we cannot change Putin's mind, but we can change his calculus. And the only way we can change his calculus is to make the price he has to pay for controlling Ukraine too high. And the way to get there is to provide military support. And it took some time before I realized that too, because I'm coming from a country that, and I'm still believing in this concept of deterrence, defense and dialogue, but the room for dialogue with Russia just went away as Russia decided that they wanted to control Ukraine and they wanted to use military force to achieve that goal.
And of course you're no longer NATO's Secretary General, you've handed over to Mark Rutte. But still, what does NATO, what does the alliance need to do to end this war that Russia is launching against Ukraine? How can the NATO alliance make it very clear to Russia that it cannot win this war?
The quickest way of ending a war is to lose a war. But that will not bring peace. That will bring occupation, and occupation is not peace. So the challenge in Ukraine is to end the war in a way where Ukraine prevails as a sovereign independent nation. And then we're back to the basic message. Putin's aim is to control Ukraine. We cannot change his mind, but we can change his calculus. And the way to do that is to make the Ukrainians stronger on the battlefield. So he realizes that he cannot achieve his goals on the battlefield, but he has to sit down and negotiate a lasting, peaceful agreement. So the more you want a political peaceful agreement, the more you have to arm the Ukrainians. That's a paradox. And the paradox is also that the more credible and the more long-term that military support is, the sooner the war can end. Because now Putin believes that he can outlast us. And so long as he believes that we will give up one day, he continues to fight. So again, we can end the war tomorrow by losing the war, but that's not peace. That's dangerous. It's a tragedy for the Ukrainians. It's dangerous for us. So the challenge is to end the war and prevent that Ukraine continues, and then support Ukraine is the only way.
And if you say that one of your biggest regrets is not arming Ukraine more efficiently and better and with more resolve at the time, what other areas do you see where NATO is not acting in the way it should to deter other big players?
Well, first of all, I'm a bit careful starting to criticize NATO today, because one thing is to acknowledge that I could have done things differently, and that's what I also describe in my book. What we succeeded in doing, but also where we did not succeed, and I'm part of both the achievements, but also the defeats in my tenure as NATO Secretary General. So I'm careful in a way assessing too much what they do today. But second, I actually believe that NATO is doing a lot of right things today. Also, NATO is the world is more dangerous, but NATO is much stronger, and that adaptation has taken some years. We built down NATO and defense after the end of the Cold War, but over the last years, NATO has become much stronger with more forces, higher readiness, increased defense spending, and that continues now. And I think that's the best way to deter any potential aggressor, be it Russia or any other that may do something harmful to NATO.
Okay, so let me ask you, in your capacity as a member of the Norwegian cabinet, you're Norway's finance minister, but we need to talk about an increase in incursions into NATO airspace, including your own. Just this week, there were drone sightings that led to flights having to be diverted. Have you got any more information on that? Where did they come from, those drones that were sighted that led to disruption in your air traffic?
When it comes to the drones sighting in Norway, we don't have any final assessment of where they come from or what kind of object actually it was. So I'm very careful going into that, partly because we also seen before that some instances we thought were drones proved to not be that. So I think I will leave that to the Norwegian police and Norwegian military authorities to give more details, but so far the main message is that it's too early to assess. Then that's quite different from what we have seen in Norway when it comes to Russian airspace violations, and we had 3 of them this year. And we also had some airspace violations, Estonia with the drones in Poland and also in Romania. And of course this is very serious because there's a full-fledged war going on in our neighborhood in Ukraine. And then Russia, the aggressor, is violating the airspace in different ways against several NATO allies. And I think we have to react in a firm but calm way, meaning that the Russians have to understand that we see what they do. We have to detect and intercept, as we often do when you have the capabilities. And especially over Poland, we saw how Polish F-16s, Dutch F-35s, German Patriot batteries were activated and helped to protect NATO airspace over Poland. So we have high readiness, we have more presence, but I think also the airspace violations highlights the need to further increase our capacity with more planes, more air defense, but also to develop technology to counter drones, which is a bit different than piloted aircrafts. And the paradox, not paradox, but is that we train and help the Ukrainians, but the reality is that they are also training us. I just visited a military base in Norway where Norwegian soldiers train Ukrainian soldiers, but they told us that actually the Ukrainians are coming to Norway and teach us how to manage drones, surveillance drones, attack drones, and counter drone warfare and all that. So Ukraine is providing a lot of valuable knowledge also to all NATO allies.
And President Zelensky again said that why don't NATO allies also come and join forces with Ukraine when it comes to protecting airspace? Should NATO allies also help protect Ukrainian airspace in Western Ukraine?
My position was as Secretary General of NATO for 10 years, no. And my understanding is that that's still the clear NATO position. And that highlights a dilemma and a challenge, is that when we saw the full-scale invasion that morning of 24th of February 2022, NATO made two decisions. One was to support Ukraine, which we have done. The other was to do whatever we could to prevent the war from escalating beyond Ukraine. And therefore I remember very well a phone call I had with President Zelensky, also described in the book, where he asked for NATO support to close the airspace, to have a no-fly zone, as NATO allies have done before in Bosnia, in Iraq. And I told him that will not happen, because we are supporting you, but we are not going to do that in a way that involves NATO in a full-scale conflict with Russia. So we support Ukraine, but we don't want the war to escalate to a full war between Russia and NATO. And therefore we cannot implement a no-fly zone, because then NATO planes has to shoot down Russian planes, take out Russian air defense systems, and then we have a war between Russia and NATO. So it illustrates some of the dilemmas we face, but that makes it again just more important to support Ukrainians so they can defeat the Russians themselves, as long as we don't send in NATO troops or NATO planes to help them.
One very last question, because you're taking over as the head of the Munich Security Conference. We're here, of course, in Warsaw at the Security Forum. Are you going to invite Russian representatives?
Well, I think I should come back to that when I've taken up my position at the Munich Security Conference. I'm now in discussions with them how and when that can happen. And I think that it was a great advantage for many years to have the Russians there. I met, I've seen Lavrov there for many times. I also there where Putin spoke. So I think they for many years played an important role. But of course there is a limit, and there is a kind of at some stage it's not possible to have meaningful dialogue. And for the last couple of years it has not been possible to have that with the Russians at Munich or at any or many other similar conferences.
I look forward to interviewing you there then.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jens Stoltenberg.
Thank you.